Hello, in this lecture we're going to work a problem using a process cost system. So remember, when we use a process cost system, that means that we are producing inventory, we're manufacturing, and when we manufacture, we either generally talk about a job cost system or a process cost system. Job cost system usually has inventory that is different in nature and difference in size and whatnot, so we have to allocate information per job. Process cost means that we usually have very similar type of inventory, and therefore we're going to allocate the cost in a process through the process, like if we're refining oil or something like that. So process cost system here, we're going to calculate the equivalent units at this time. So here's our data on the left hand side, and we are going to use this data in order to calculate the equivalent units in an Excel type worksheet. And just thinking about kind of the format of the worksheet, whether you do it by hand or whether it's in Excel, is half the challenge, like it is for many type of accounting problems, just setting up the way this thing should look. So we're going to start off calculating the costs that we need to account for during this time period, meaning we allocated the costs obviously in the prior time period. We're looking at the current cost that we're going to have to allocate. We're going to use equivalent units in order to do so. So let's think about just dollar amounts first. If we have beginning work in process, we're going to start. And they're going to give us these numbers. These are going to be the dollar amounts. We're not talking units here. So we're going to say the direct materials are 9900 and the conversion are 110970. And therefore the total, if we use our trusty sum function, equals SUM brackets of the 9,900 plus the 110,970. We come up to the 128.7. We're going to add to that the dollar amount that was incurred during the month for direct materials and conversion. Remember that conversion means that it's the stuff that changed the direct material to the end product. So that's going to be things like direct labor and overhead, things that converted the direct material. So that's going to be the 248.4 and the 1082970 for conversion. Once again, we can sum those up, summing these up using the sum function. 248.4 plus the 1,082,970 gives us the 1,331,370. We can then sum them up this way as well, having a total column allocating the total cost. Whoops, need an equal sign there. Equals the sum of the 9,009 plus the 248.4 tab equals the sum of the 110,970 plus the 1,082,970 tab equals the sum of the 128.70 and the 1,331,370, and enter. And of course it should also add up this way as well. 1,452,240 is our total. Now that's pretty straightforward. We know what the costs are in terms of the dollar amount. What we don't know really is how to allocate those costs between these two departments. We're assuming that Department A happens before Department B. So we have to do something like packaging, or production before the packaging department, and something like that. So we have to allocate the items to A department, and then it goes through A department, and then we're going to take that inventory, that work in process, apply it to the second process, that process being B. Similar to production, if we're making something, we're going to do the production of the item and then maybe the packaging of the item. Next, we're going to move from talking about dollar amounts at this point to talking about unit amounts, and we're going to use the two of these, of course, to calculate the cost for equivalent units. So we're moving to units, and note we're going to basically have a calculation like this that we got to just kind of memorize and think through whenever we do this type of problem, where we want to break this out into the format of beginning units that we have, plus those units started and completed, and then minus the ending units, and plus the total ending units, gives us the total units available. Now I'll explain why we need to break that out in this way as we go, and that's what we will be putting in here. So we're going to say that the 3,000 beginning inventory in units is given to us here. So we have units 3,000. Those are in process. So again, if they're in the processing part, they're already in there in this month. They're already in the work in process, in the processing. What has not happened yet is the conversion, the labor and the overhead in order to process those raw materials to finished goods. So in terms of the raw material, when we think about a Fifo method, we're generally going to say that we're not going to have any conversion or any cost related to the material that's already in the process at the beginning. That's going to be a usual assumption under Fifo because all the material went in there last time. The only thing that's lacking in the process is going to be the direct labor and the overhead. Therefore, the amount of cost that we're going to allocate of this additional cost is not going to be included because all that material cost went in there before. So we're going to say, of course, then the 3,000 units times 0 is going to be nothing for this month, this period, whatever this period may be. And then on the conversion side, it says that the beginning work in process from last month that's already in process has 40% complete. So how complete is it? I mean, what are we going to have to do to it this time in terms of labor and overhead? We're going to have to say 1 minus 40%, and it's going to have to be 60%. So if it was 40% complete last time, and it's a first in, first out, we're going to finish whatever's still in there this time, and therefore we're going to have to do the other 60%. So of these 3,000 total units we're accounting for, equivalent units we're going to take times 60% is going to be that 1,800 equivalent units. So then we're going to have to calculate the units that are started and completed. Now the reason we want to do this is because, of course, if they started it and completed it, then the equivalent units are going to be 100% both for materials and conversion. That's why we want to break this out in this kind of funny calculation we haven't really worked with too much before, and break out the amount that are started and completed for this equivalent unit calculation. We can do that in this case by saying, okay, here's the amount that was completed, units completed and transferred out, 22,200, and we're going to assume minus the ones that were, those 22,200 includes the beginning inventory, because we're assuming FIFO. So if it was in there at the beginning, that's part of the unit that were transferred out. Therefore, that minus the 3,000 means that the amount that was started and completed this time is the 19,200. And if it was started and completed, then 100% of the materials went in this time. So we're going to say the 19,200 times 100%. Equivalent units are the same. Same with conversion. We completely finished the conversion process. So 19,200 times 100%. That's why we do the started and completed. And then we're going to have the stuff that's still in there. It's still in the processing department at the end of the time period. So we're going to say that that's going to be this given to us in this 2,400 still in work in process, 2,400. And they're going to have to tell us, well, how converted are those? We started them, we put them into process now, and we haven't yet finished them. How finished are they? Problem's going to have to give us a number on that. And they're going to say, okay, it's 40% complete. But that 40% complete is going to be allocated to the conversion part of it. Because remember that we don't really need to have any number to tell us how complete it was in terms of material, because the usual assumption for these when we talk about first in, first out is that all of the materials went into process. So 100% of the materials are kind of assumed for most problems that went into process. The only thing that hasn't happened is we haven't finished converting those materials using direct labor, using the overhead to produce the finished inventory. So we're going to say that for materials, the 2004 times 100%, they are total the same. As far as conversion, the conversion of those direct materials, they're only 80% complete. So for equivalent units for the conversion, we've got the 2004 times the 80%, and that's going to be only 1920. So if we sum these up, then we're going to say sum of, we've got the 3,000 units plus the 19 started and completed plus the ending. Those are the units that we're going to have to allocate out in terms of the cost that we had during this time period. And in terms of equivalent units for materials, we're summing up none of the beginning, because those were all in there last time, all of the ones that are started and completed, and all of the ones that were started and not completed are going to be in there. And then in terms of the conversion equivalent units equals the sum of the 1,008, the stuff we finished in the beginning, plus of course all of that was started and completed, and the portion of the stuff that's not yet done in the end. So note what we have here. We've got the total units in terms of total units we need to account for. When we talk about equivalent units, we're talking about equivalent units in terms of either materials or conversion. That's why we have two of them. It's not like we have added these up and we have 44,520 equivalent units. No, we have equivalent units related to materials of 21,600, always going to be equal to or less than the total units. And we have equivalent units in terms of conversion of 22,920, always, of course, being equal to or less than the total units that we're going to account for. Now that we have the total dollar amounts and the equivalent units, we can calculate the cost per equivalent unit here. And before I do that, I just want to point out that in order to do any of these problems, again, they're going to be very similar in nature, just like many accounting problems. And if you memorize just kind of this table, whether you write it by hand in a test format or do it in Excel or something like that, you want to basically be able to put this table into place. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to take the cost incurred this period in terms of dollar amounts divided by the equivalent units. So the cost of this period, just remember you're taking the cost that was incurred this period, not the total cost, because we're allocating the costs that were incurred during this time. So we're going to say that's going to be the materials 248.4, and for the conversion we're talking about the dollar amount cost is going to be the 1,082,970 for conversion, and then we're going to divide that by equivalent units. So for materials we had the 21.6 equivalent units, and for the conversion we had the 22.9. So we may even want to put the dollar signs here. So if this is going to be dollars, this is going to be dollars. I'm going to format, right click, and go to format cells and make it maybe currency, and add the dollar and take off the decimals. So this is units. These are dollars. So this is the current dollar amount divided by the units is going to give us the cost per unit. The cost per equivalent unit, we should say. That's going to be the 248.4 divided by the 21,006 gives us 12. If I go to the Home tab, Numbers, and add decimals, not that many decimals, we got to 1150. Let's do the same thing here. We're going to say we're going to take the 1,082,970 divided by the 22,920, and once again go to the Home tab, Numbers, add decimals, and we get the 4725. Those are rounded numbers, so you know,